Ready for tentative budget?
Oh, we are.
Okay.
So Scott's going to give you a presentation tonight, and then I'm going to close that presentation when we get to the final two footnotes. But more or less, the Board of Education approved the tentative budget in July. That tentative budget showed a projected deficit of $590. So we are down now in August to $344. We've cut roughly $145,000. And so what Scott's going to show you tonight are the proposals that were the proposed changes that the administration is recommending. Now, this is not something the board has to take a formal resolution on, although it shows up on the action sheet. We just more or less want to get a straw poll that yes, these are all good things, and go ahead and put them in. So when you see the final budget in September, it would have the updated deficit of 344 and all the changes that we're showing you. Scott would put these in after today's meeting, and then updated budget would be posted online, and it would have a new footer or header on it that shows it's the tentative budget as of August 9th or 10th, whenever he posts it. So what I'd ask is that let Scott discuss the proposed changes, and when he's done with that, I want to address one question I received and kind of put a little color to the budget.
So to try to make it easy and able to view it, I broke it down into revenue and expense. So we'll start with the revenue. Obviously, the big thing here would be our tax appeals. We do budget roughly $425,000 in there. Looking at historical trends as far as what type of tax appeals we've paid out, it looks like we're able to drop that down to $325,000 on that. That's where you pick up the $100,000 right there on the revenue side. General state aid.
So Scott, so that they understand this, we used to budget $425,000. The tentative budget, just from one line item, because you had it in two places.
Yes.
The tentative budget they saw in July was $325,000.
Mm-hmm.
Your recommendation is now to take that one line item down to $225,000.
Yes.
Okay. So, because I don't want someone that what you just said, it doesn't match up with what's on the paper.
I understand.
Okay.
That was strictly was for the ed fund. That's where we have the most money set aside. It's our biggest fund that we have, and that's where most of the appeals would come out of. So that one line item is the $100,000.
Okay.
The next big one on there is general state aid, being that the state is kind of in limbo here with what they're going to pass with the budget. On that is 90% of what we collected from FY2017, which puts us at $1.3 million on there. $28,000 right there on that line item with it. That's taken a pretty conservative approach on that.
Okay.
Special ed, room and board. This one I looked into to try to figure out how do we get reimbursed on this one. This is based off of how many students are outplaced within the district. This fluctuates between 2 and 3 students. After looking at historicals, this could be increased on that to pick up an additional $50,000 on that based off of historical.
So this is still conservative,
Still conservative, yes it is.
but it's closer to what we received over the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's an additional $50,000 in revenue.
And then the last revenue source that we looked at was our rentals. Last summer kind of took the conservative approach, being that the main gym was being renovated with the new floor and new bleachers. Didn't know really what to account for as far as rental usage on it. After looking at the actuals and kind of thinking, okay, we missed out on a couple tournaments that hopefully we could get. We can get those in there and increase some revenue there. So there's an increase from what the tentative budget was at 80 that was presented in July to 95 here for a $15,000 increase.
So overall, just in revenue, we found an additional $205,000.
May I interrupt on this?
Sure.
A simple question. going back to the first thing, the tax appeals. So why is that considered revenue?
It's just weird because the Cook County, although it's an expenditure to us, the Cook County Treasurer's Office, or our Proviso Township Treasurer's Office, takes it out of our revenue before we get our property tax receipts. So when we get the property tax receipts, if we collect $1 million and they only give us 700, they'll show a negative 300,000 for property tax appeals, but they do that under the revenue. So just to keep our accounting consistent.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So in other words, we're thinking that the property tax appeals will now be, we're going to lose $225,000
So
versus $325.
Correct. Well, we originally, last year's budget, we had 425, and now we're taking the budget down to 325.
Okay.
So he probably could include in his footnote overall, we're going from 425 to 325 total, correct?
Mm-hmm. Through all funds.
Through all funds.
We're also now working with our attorneys and looking what the open appeals are, right, and having a better picture of the overall dollars,
We
right?
looked at historicals. We paid out over 150 something last year in tax appeals. We have roughly 170 open. So what I did with that is basically we know we have 170 open, and then not to mention any that we don't know of. So that's why we used like almost double of 170. It goes to 340, 325. So
And
we
there,
were able
and
to
there
get
is a report
100,000 there.
in the tentative budget from our legal counsel highlighting what's open and possibility of
Sure.
appeals that are out there.
When you go to the expenditures, I told Scott just for the sake of time to highlight the big items. So the ones that are in parentheses are actual changes, Scott? And if there's no parentheses, it's something we had to correct and add money
And add
back,
money,
correct?
yes. A lot of these, we're going through and looking at our clubs, our activities, the sports. I wanted to make sure that every single one was captured per what was in the collective bargaining. There was a little bit of movement on that, where I had to account for every single organization, every sport that's in there. Crossing guard, we had to add a little bit more per the settlement agreement with the Village of Brookfield. And then, of course, I looked through the different contracts that were out there to try to see, okay, did I account for what the anticipated amount would be for FY2018? So a couple of those were adjusted with the copier and the postage machine. As far as the board, looking at some of the items that the board has, we looked at legal and some of the professional services and dropped those down, hoping that with the lawsuit kind of behind us, we won't be spending as much on legal. And then also with some of the professional services that were offered last year, drop that down a little bit to gain some money or lower those expenditures. Looking at another big item was our transportation for LADSI. I knew there was going to be a 6% increase for Grand Prairie. I didn't know where the actuals were going to come in, so with the reduction from the tentative budget on that, that's 10%, from a 10% increase from our actuals from 17. Hopefully that will be enough in case there is a transfer that comes in that needs to be added to a special route to cover that. So that was a reduction there from the tentative budget to what the proposed change is. I had a bill in that wasn't in the original tentative budget, the building administration performance incentives. Those are spread out over various accounts to represent wherever they're being billed out. The administrators are being billed out, so it will be in different areas, but it is clearly marked as school performance incentive in the tentative budget.
Last year was the first year that the board provided small bonuses to the building administration for achieving their goals on the district and board goals. So that was not budgeted under their salary. We did receive a question for that. So now their salaries are budgeted as one line item, and their potential earnings on incentives are budgeted as well. So just to make sure that's accounted for, that was implemented.
The other major item that still may fluctuate is the certified salary, depending on how the final staffing moves here. It may move from science to another department, So you may see at the next one a shift in that salary depending on if another additional FTE is needed. But as of right now, it looks like there would be a 0.3 FTE unused to bring down that reduction in the science area. It may not be for science, so I don't want anyone thinking that, hey, we lowered FTE in science. It's just there as a placeholder. And if it needed to go to a different department, it will be taken out of science and put into the correct area out there once that is determined with final staffing.
So in July and August, Kristen provides you with like a staffing chart, so we had like 0.7 of a teacher or 0.7 FTE unallocated for. We're assuming based on our transfer trends that we're gonna need probably at least a 0.4 of that. So that 0.3, if we don't get full transfers or have any conflicts, we should be able to reduce by about a 0.3 FTE that's unaccounted for, which is a $16,000 savings.
Can I ask, why do you have for Quest Satellite, why is it under revenue and expenditures for the services provided other district?
Okay. Being that it kind of offsets it, that's the price that we pay out, and then we bill the satellite schools for it.
So
So
it's a
then it
wash.
looks as
It's
if
a wash.
it's a wash.
Okay.
Right, it's a way that we had to do the intergovernmental
Now
agreements.
agreement with it.
Because all the feeder schools
So-
pay us, we pay one lump sum to Quest, and then they reimburse us.
Reimburse. There were some questions submitted. One of the tricky things.
Scott, are you going into the questions from Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Before you get into that, let's stick on this page for a second, because this is important. So we've already lowered I'd like to answer the one question I wanted to answer and close from this piece before you get into any general questions. We've already lowered the projected deficit to 344. I put 2 footnotes in on the bottom. We're budgeting at a 90% rate for GSA. Last year we received 1.4, it was almost another 140,000. So if we come in at the same rate we did as last year, who knows right now, because we're relying on the state, but if we come in at another 140,000, like we did this year, that would take our deficit to 200. If we get only the 170,000 in tax appeals that we know are open, that's another 150,000 we pick up. Now I only put down in this footnote 60, being conservative, say we get something we don't know. But that's another, let's say 60, let's say another 100,000 roughly. That would take our deficit only to 100,000. Third thing that I don't have on there, that I worked through some things today, is we're budgeting property tax collection at 98.5%. We got additional money in July that really should have been applied to last year, but because we're on a cash basis with the treasurer's office, even though it was for the FY16 taxes, it will sit in our budget for this year. So if we get our property tax collection at 98.5%, we'll have this additional money that we receive. We'll actually have a small surplus. So Wes submitted a question to Gary and myself. He asked me to look at 5 things I could do to try to get this to a balanced budget. 3 of those things are revenue sources in regards to the general state aid, the property tax appeals, and the property tax collection rate. The other 2 expenditure items that we could reduce, or that are 2 big parts of our budget that we can't reduce at this time to balance the budget, are personnel and programming. So what makes that weird is that under the tenure laws and under staffing laws in Illinois, you have to make staffing decisions in March, right around when you're first starting the budget process. So you won't know, that's what kind of, for people that are just getting new into the Board of Education business and school funding business, the state doesn't pay their bills on time, yet they want us to make staffing decisions 6 months before we get our payments. We don't approve our budget till September, even though we're 3 months into our new fiscal year. In Cook County, which is different from DuPage and Lake, they release the property tax dollars kind of on a random schedule. We don't just get it all at once. So it looked, I don't know if anybody remember, but when Tim Walsh had the question in the July meeting, well, it looks like we only collected 94% of our property taxes for last fiscal year. on July 7th or 8th, we got a $500-something thousand check from the county for the rest of those taxes. So we really collected close to 100%, but now that money's gonna apply to this year. You know, even though the auditor will accrue it back to last fiscal year, it's sitting in this year's budget. So I mean, there's some moving pieces here.
Well, it's good for us though this year.
It's good, and so what I'm trying to say to you is I looked at this, I even sat down with the auditor and Scott today and said, I can go and present this budget to this board and put 1.4 million in there. I could put 170 in tax appeals. I could put 100% of tax collection and show you probably still a small surplus, no deficit. But I'd rather prepare you for worst case scenario than on June 30th be sitting in front of you saying, okay, property taxes didn't come in, tax appeals came in high, and state aid didn't come in. We actually have a $700,000 deficit. You know, so I'm trying to show you worst case scenario. I know some of your neighbors or people in the community are like, hey, he's trying to pass a deficit budget. And that's why I wanted to touch on these footnotes with you. If all comes to fruition, we should be right at a balanced budget or a very small deficit, maybe even a small surplus. But I think it's better for us to take a conservative approach than to be banking on all these revenue sources that we haven't seen yet or know if we're going to get, and then end up spending that money before we have it. And so if I had to give you those 5 items of how to get this to a balance, 3 of them are revenue, and we probably could get there if I just put it all in. But it's I wouldn't run my house like that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You know, so it's kind of like spending your bonus before you know you're going to get it. You know, like Clark Griswold bought the pool and he didn't.
Right.
Got the Jelly of the Month club, right? So a little levity for you, but I also wanted to start preparing the board and the community and the teachers like we are running close to either being surplus or deficit. If all stars align, we're still at, you know, we don't have any hidden money or money trees out there or things, and so we need to make sure we're making smart fiscal decisions going forward. If the state funding and some of this stuff doesn't come through, this board will have to start looking at staffing and programming items, you know, after the first of the year to prepare for next year's budget, FY18 or 19's budget. I don't think we're there yet. I think we got to wait and see what happens with the state funding and Rauner. Property tax appeals, we'll have some historicals again. We'll see if that's another area that comes in generous. I understand the concern. I understand the community concern because that's one thing I've prided myself on while being your superintendent is having a balanced budget. You know, what gets weird is we put these budgets in, and like last year we said we're going to have a small surplus. Scott's first year, I think the board approved the FY17 budget was supposed to be anywhere from $10,000 to a $20,000 surplus. We came in at close to $300,000 or just over $300,000.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
If we would have got that payment from the county on June 30th, we would have came in at an $800,000 surplus, which is good news, but it shows you there's some flexibility that maybe we didn't have.
And it's the county.
Right.
They
So
just,
I can't
they just
rely
release
on
at
them
different
because,
times.
and so I think we're still in a good case. Our fund balances are at 45%. Everything's okay. And I'm showing you a deficit, and I'm asking you to approve a small deficit in September. But if everything comes to fruition, we should be a lot closer to, you know, a $100,000 deficit or a $100,000 surplus. It's give or take. It's like a $200,000 swing. But I wanted to lay that out for you so that, and it's on TV as well.
Yeah, so I think, you know, I mean, this is just right over 1%, right? What's 1%?
Correct.
250,000 or 350,000. And you're saying it should probably come online where it'll be a balance. It'll balance itself due to this, you know, the county and the money and the, right?
I mean, three of the biggest things are revenue sources.
I still think it's not, you know, we're getting to the point, I think the point in that conversation was we're right there. And what's
Sure.
going to happen next year? We got more raises come in.
Mhm.
We got more, you know, there's no more revenue. Yeah, we're going to spend some more.
Correct.
What are we going to do next year? Except, you know, that 1% is going to be 1.5%, it's gonna be 2%.
Absolutely.
And that's not you wouldn't run your house like that either.
Correct. This
You know?
board will definitely have to keep that in mind after January 1. Now, historically, the way we would, one thing that does happen in education is that teachers are on a set years of service, unless you get someone that wants to go early or something, a change happens. A teacher near the top of the scale ends up leaving and you hire somebody new at a different part of the salary structure. And we specifically during negotiations worked with the teachers union to identify over the next 10 years what the retirement rate would be and teachers eligible for retirement. So the next year or two, you're right, that 1% could become 2%. But then in year 3, it should go back towards the 1% mark because we already have had teachers that are at the top of the scale have put in for retirement and will start getting on their final retirement contract, and those teachers will start coming off the books, and as you hire new people out of college, there should be a shift in expenditures there.
Assuming we don't have an increase in students and have to hire more teachers anyway.
Correct. Or if you did have an increase in students by losing a teacher that's retiring at the top of the scale, you could actually hire 2 for the same price of the 1.
2 for 1.
Right.
And address that need without having to pick up additional expenses.
So
It's a
that-
good point. Exactly what you're bringing up is what we have to be cognizant of.
Right.
Absolutely.
We've got to get ahead, we got
We
to
gotta
talk
be ahead.
about it now instead of
Yes.
next year. We're like, oh, why is it 2.5%?
Absolutely.
And we know we've got a bubble of more students coming. And it might, and I know Gary's told me that it's going to level off, but not for a little while.
Well, this year, I think it's either next year is the level off point. But even this year, if you look, we're projecting 16, even on Kristen's sheet, we're projecting 1636. Right now, we're at 1580. So even if, the simple math that the board that I've always kind of used is for every 30 kids, you're basically, 30 to 35 kids are looking at a teacher. Because those 30 kids got to take 5 classes, the teacher teaches 5 classes. So, and we're at a 0.7 of extra staffing already available. So we're okay right now. We may even have a little extra that we can reduce without having to riff or lay off anybody. But the point you're bringing up is an excellent point, and that we need to be cognizant that we're looking at about a 1% deficit. We want to make sure it doesn't continue to grow and head up that chart. We can start to back it down.
So Kevin, in terms of your advisory councils, who'd take the lead of that in the start of the year? Would it be finance or personnel? Just thinking about possible personnel or program changes.
I would provide recommendations to the board and the finance council, and then we discuss them, we troubleshoot it with the building administration, and then we would bring them back to the Board of Education. To the board members that have been on since my tenure here, I've already went through a lot of those with you. We've made a concerted effort to try to lower class sizes over the last 4 years. So if we want to keep core class sizes small, then a way to address personnel issues, considering that's 80% of your budget, you have to look at class sizes in non-required courses or how many electives you allow students to take. You have to look at engagement. So, we got to make sure we're not going backwards off of exactly what we did over the last 4 years to kind of rebuild everything up from 2011, right? So I think a lot of this will become clearer before the holidays when we know what's going on with state funding, we know what's going on with pension shifts, we'll know what's going on with our property tax appeals, and we should be able to get some of this under, control. Because like I said, last year, if you look at that money, even though it's not going to be accrued, we really finished that year with an $800,000 surplus. That itself is almost like 3%. So,
I think from the long-term perspective, we don't want to get in the hole that we got in last time.
absolutely.
Which is basically asking the taxpayers to bail us out after running these huge deficits. So I appreciate your looking forward, Kevin,
And I hope the board understands my logic. I'd rather show you doomsday and present something better than to be sitting here in June and saying, well, we didn't get this, and that's why we're short $700,000 or $800,000, and it looks like I was irresponsible, or the administration was irresponsible, and I don't think that's how you want to run this district, or are paying me to run the district, so.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it as well. I know deficits make people uncomfortable, but I think you're being fiscally responsible by recognizing the uncertainty and planning for it. Because saying that it's going to come out even is simply not the realistic situation in education. It's ignoring the fact that there is such great uncertainty. And while, I mean, I am comfortable overestimating our expenditures and underestimating our revenue because of what you just said, then you don't have that situation where you're like, oh, whoops, sorry, now it's 400,000 deficit. Like, I would rather err on the side of caution, given the extreme uncertain nature of so
The state of
many of
Illinois.
these factors. That is just education. That's just, it is what it is. That's the nature of the beast.
We still have some categoricals that we did not receive from FY17 from the state. So if they give us a payment here in August from last year, since we operate on a cash basis with the treasurer, it's going to look like we got an extra 800,000, which really should have been put to last year.
It's very hard that we live within our means and the state does not meet its obligation on a regular basis and continues to fall short percentage-wise to schools across the state of how much they're paying of their obligation, right? So we do our best to live within our means, but yet the state is not giving what they promise.
And the staff gets it from, we take some grief from the staff because at the same time, we're going through with a fine-tooth comb on their budgets, on personnel decisions, making sure they're exactly 27 to 1 or 20, and all of a sudden then they see a $500,000 surplus or an $800,
Yeah.
wait, that could have been a few more supplies, or that could have been a half a teacher more. So I get it from both ends, and I understand everybody's perspective, so.
Well, I don't know, I mean, I work for companies and they're like, look, it's tight and this is that, and you gotta cut 10%, so I understand where the staff's
Sure.
coming from too, because we're trying to watch that also, but, and my concern with my uncomfortable was maybe there's a little bit of I don't really understand it, where this money fluctuates, comes
Right.
from, June to September,
Right.
or however that plays out, and then, I'm looking at it, I was like, we haven't been running deficits, right? You haven't done that. in a
4 years, 5 years, yeah.
Right, and we did prior to that, and it wasn't,
Got bad fast.
and it got bad fast, right?
Right.
So, we just don't wanna get back there.
And not that it makes it right or wrong, but on any given day in this state, over 50% of the schools are running a deficit because of the way that funding just
Well,
is.
I think we would all agree that the state of Illinois is not run very well. But, that doesn't mean we have to do it.
Well, that's exactly right. We need to set the example. That's right.
So I'm trying to do it without causing a panic. I'm
Right.
cognizant that the board wants me to be fiscally responsible, and I think my track record has shown that in my first 6 years. And so I wanted to just kind of help decompress, even to help you with your neighbors. Like, hey, it looks like a $300,000 deficit, but he's probably got $300,000 or $400,000 of unaccounted for revenue because of the state situation that would make it balanced. So it's an
And
easy answer for
I think
me.
this kind of ties into Liz's presentation, though, when we think about maybe going with an option that gives us the greatest flexibility.
Right,
Given
some wiggle
the
room.
extreme uncertainty, given the state, and SB1,
Absolutely.
which
But you're
you're
also gonna
saying.
run into
So
that.
it ties together.
Well, you have to manage your money, you can't just borrow your way out, and it maybe appears like we would be trying to do that. And I don't know if I'm very comfortable with that either. I mean, I want a baseball field more just about as much as anybody else, so
Well, the question
I'm all
becomes,
about getting that money for
the
that.
question becomes how close to kids do you want
Yes.
these things to get, right? I mean, already historically, since the ship has been righted, that was done. There have been a lot of cuts that were not close to kids. So now as we get down this road further, you know, you don't want to deficit spend, but then do you want 40 kids in a class?
Well, that's where we have to go
Right.
back to the public and say, maybe it's time to get more money, right? I mean, there
But if you
is.
could get,
I
if
mean,
you have
we
money.
didn't pass that previous, no one wants a tax increase, we're taxed pretty heavily, but no one wants 40 kids in class. So let's talk about what are our options, and if that's the option, that is the doomsday, then I think they would spend $35 more.
Well, one of the options we have, without having to go all the way out to referendum and everything, was that 3C1. So that we don't have to cut classes or have 40 in a class if we get a shift, or if we have higher tax appeals than we expected this year. Because it's a reassessment year. If you've got the little letter in your mailbox, we may get more this year than we anticipate. So maybe this year our expenses might spike a little bit, so that little extra money will help ride the spike till we can level out.
We got some time to think about it, you know, but,
Let me just throw a couple comments out there. You know, we, at least, you know, Laura, John, myself, Tim have been on the board. We've always promoted the fact that, you know, we need to control what we can control, and the expense side of it is what we can control. The revenues, because again, playing with state, playing with the timing issues, as Kevin has said, is a different animal. So we've always conservatively been more conservative on the revenue projections, and we've always scrubbed the expense side pretty well. And, you know, and as you, if you've watched our board meetings, you know that we sometimes go and look at details on a $1,000 check or a $300 check to see what's being paid out. So this is a continuation of it. It's just that as the years have progressed, that revenue to expense spread has been getting narrower and narrower. And it's just this year now, especially with the fact that we just don't know what's happening with state aid specifically, is that it's coming to a deficit this year. So the key going into this year, because we've already made a commitment with personnel, is to make sure that those expenditures don't get out of line, and we continue focusing on the expenditure side of it. And as Dr. Skink has said, we'll have to revisit the administration and the school's vision of what they want from personnel, and if we need to revise that vision, we may need to revise it going for the next year.
Scott, you had some general questions submitted to me, cognizant of the time. Are there, just hit on some of the big ones or some of the summary ones?
Okay. As we were talking with the state, I do want to just say that it's kind of difficult to really project what our grants are going to be. Allotments change from year to year. Carryover money comes in at different points. So when you're putting these grants together, I put in placeholders not knowing exactly what our allotment's going to be. This year at the state, we had some turnover with different grant administrators. So when you submit your grant, something that was approved the previous year may not be approved this year. So expenditures change. So it is kind of hard to kind of budget what items are going to be in with the various grants. I do have placeholders in the tentative budget out there based off of what our allotment was from FY2017. So I wanted just to carry them over into FY2018 so I have a placeholder. Now, as things change, you may see items moving forward that may not have a budget item but will be expended out of it. And that all depends on what the grant administrator approves and based off of what programs will be needed within the school. I want to touch on the athletic department with putting in the paid service, the supplies, and the dues and fees. It was a slight increase from what the previous way was, being in each individual sport had its own supply account, paid service, and dues and fees. Just want to let everyone know that there is a slight increase at $650 total amongst that.
I think we're
But
okay with that.
I just wanted to mention it. And then the last thing is, I went through various line items just to see where different people were being billed out of, because there were some obvious ones that were over budget and some that were under budget. An example would be non-certified staff being billed out of different accounts. One being billed out of a security account that should have been billed out of an assistant principal account. So I went through and kind of adjusted those so that in the FY18 budget, it will be correct with it. It won't look so skewed with being over budget, under budget. And that was the main questions. I just wanted to hit in general on those.
We fixed all the formatting, so both revenue and expenditures compare budget to actuals and budget to budget.
Yep.
Okay. All right, any other questions on the budget? I hope that clarified some things for everybody.
it
Good?
did. Good conversation.
All right. Payment of bills, Dr. King.